Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Andy King. I will be your moderator today. This session is called Blueprint for OER Success, Building a Collaborative Learning Community. Got a few housekeeping items before we get started. Live captioning is available during the presentation. You can toggle this on and off using the attendee controls at the bottom of the screen. The session will be recorded and provided on the conference website following the conference. Please add questions to the Q&A or chat box, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. We encourage you to engage with us and other attendees through the chat function. And if you're having any technical difficulties, you can contact the organizers using the link at the bottom of the Schedule site. All right, now what you've all came for. I'd like to introduce Bethany Mickle and Emily Sheeta, our presenters for the session. Bethany is an instructional designer and OER librarian at the University of Virginia, and Emily is a senior instructional designer in arts and science, learning design, and technology at the University of Virginia. Emily and Bethany, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Andy, for the warm introduction. Hi, everybody, and welcome. As Andy kindly introduced, I'm Bethany Mickle. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm, as he mentioned, an instructional designer with a librarian background and a deep interest in OER at the University of Virginia.
Hi, and my name is Emily Sheeta, and I'm an instructional designer in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Virginia, and I use she, her pronouns.
Before we get started today, we would like to share that at the University of Virginia, we acknowledge that the land where we learn and work is the ancestral homeland and traditional territory of the Monacan Indian Nation. We pay respect to their elders and knowledge keepers, both past and present. We acknowledge and pay respect also to the enslaved laborers, Africans, and free Black laborers who built UVA, as well as their descendants. Today, we acknowledge the land, acknowledge labor, traditions, and knowledge, and we acknowledge lives. We have a lot to share with you today and wanted to give you just a brief overview of what we're planning to discuss. As Emily had indicated, if you'd like to introduce yourself, what brought you to the session today, please feel free to do that in the chat. We always like to kind of know who's here and where you're coming from. So today we're going to be providing you with some institutional information about UVA so that you can really situate this work within the context. But then we're going to really lean into the goals of the OER learning community, discuss its design, its structure. We'll talk about some of the outcomes we've had from the learning community, and we'll highlight some of that participant feedback that's always so valuable. And of course, we'll take a moment to reflect on some of the lessons that we learned, the good, the bad, and discuss some best practices and advice for those of you who may be here today who are interested in initiating a similar learning community centered around OER. And we definitely welcome questions in chat as they come in. However, we're going to hold till the end. We've, again, allotted a nice amount of time to answer those and also have any conversation. So welcome, everybody, again, as I see your introductions coming into chat. It's wonderful to see you all here. So to briefly set the stage, the University of Virginia, we're a mid-sized R1 institution. We're located in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we have approximately 26,000 full-time students. The university's strategic plan strives for what they call the great and the good, and it includes efforts and initiatives to address what's a difficult past, and while also making the university a welcoming and accessible place where students and faculty, staff, and the community can live, learn, and thrive in an inclusive environment. Two components of that plan that really speak specifically towards open initiatives are the provision of accessible and affordable education and the attempt to remove barriers that we often see surrounding equitable opportunities for learning. So in 2021, which seems way back in the sands of time at this point, UVA took part in the Virtual Virginia Library Consortium, which I'll refer to as VIVA for everyone's sake here, course materials survey. And UVA ranked second in terms of the response rate. So this was sent out to consortium schools within the state. And as a result of the data that we received, we uncovered some really telling data regarding students' approaches to course material purchases. And Emily is going to pop that link into chat or into the chat. If you want to dig a little bit deeper, learn a little bit more, you can take a look there. But on that survey, there was a question that asked if the cost of required materials caused students to occasionally or frequently take fewer courses, not register for a course, drop or withdraw from a course, not purchase a textbook. And we found that the numbers, especially related to not purchasing a textbook, were telling. Almost half of the students responding indicated that they would forgo actually purchasing the course textbook. And that's really sort of a startling figure for us to see. And it's very troubling. And the information actually led to some important discussions and challenging of preconceptions that our students are historically financially advantaged. They're not in need of lower reduced cost materials. So it really catapulted that conversation forward. Viva is currently working on an updated survey, 2021. Like I said, seems like it's in the sands of time at this point, that they're hoping to launch in 2025. And Emily popped the link to that, the details about that into chat as well. They're working with Bayview Analytics. You may be familiar with their work on a number of series involving OER surveys and best practices. And the end goal is really to benchmark Virginia results with other states. So we can do a little further insight, collaborative efforts, all these important things that we really embrace in the open world. But this survey is going to be driven by three key questions. The first is what the impact of course materials on educational equity is amongst Virginia students. And this was really at the heart of that initial 2021 survey. Finally, course materials do students find to be the most beneficial to their learning? So we're trying to get a little bit more data about what kind of materials do students gravitate towards? What do they like using? And finally, what barriers are presented to students due to material costs, and how can those barriers be both categorized and addressed, which is really critical in terms of not just getting the information, but knowing what to do with it in the end. So now that we've talked a little bit about set the stage, about the work we've seen taking place here, we are really eager to see, some of the initiatives in Missouri that have been taking place, whether it's at your universities, amongst consortia as well. So before we move ahead, we'd invite you to share either in the chat. We certainly welcome if you prefer to do audio as well, what your institution is doing to promote collaborative strategies around open educational practices. If you're kind of new to this field, many of us kind of come to these conferences to learn a little bit more. If there's an area of growth that you'd like to see, alternatively, you can also tell us about something that you'd like to do to build this community. So I'm going to pause here for a moment and again, welcome you to share and chat. And also, if you feel more comfortable, you're certainly welcome to unmute the audio. Great. Thanks, Amanda. It looks like some mini grants to adapt, adopt, or create and is exploring what that collaboration looks like. That's a great initiative. We often know that faculty doing this work, it's often on top of so many other things that they're doing. So that's a great initiative. Robert mentions here, I'm just going to scroll up, at Kansas City, Kansas Community College about starting OER committee. Great, starting from the floor. Hey, it all starts somewhere. So that's the fact that you're having those conversations is amazing. Sarah shared OER task force that includes myself and others in the library and faculty members and staff from registration office. Those cross-pollination of departments is so critical there. I don't want to mispronounce anybody's names, but Brandel mentions offering assistance to faculty to create and adopt OER materials, beginning stages. Yeah, exactly. Those beginning stages are critical, important points that would pay faculty to create, again, that incentivizing. Library workshops, those are great. And hello to all my fellow library folks out there as well here. How to find, how to create, just knowing how to do it. Great conversations, wonderful. Presentations about fostering community. Well, there are so many great things, and I could read these all day and comment and just, derail our whole presentation to talk about these. And I'm going to take a closer look at these as we go through, and we'll have hopefully a chance at the end to chat a little bit about some of this amazing work. But I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Feel free to continue contributing in chat. Again, this is all fantastic work and really speaks to that collaborative mindset.
This is wonderful. So thank you, Bethany. With all our open efforts, we have found a consistent thread in that OER and open educational practice momentum requires community building. Rarely, if ever, does this work thrive in a silo. So I'm going to share how we went about creating a focused community of diverse learners. So we've offered our learning community twice in the past 2 years. The focus of the learning community in fall 2023, the first year we offered the program, was how OER and open pedagogy have the potential to address educational equity and empower learners. In the second iteration, offered this spring 2025, the focus pivoted to include intersections between generative AI and OER. As facilitators, Bethany and I co-designed and co-led each session, and we collaborated on the creation of our learning community Pressbooks guide. We advertised the learning community and application process through the websites and newsletters of the 3 university partners for this program: the Center for Teaching Excellence, the UVA Library, and Arts and Sciences Learning Design and Technology. Funding, which was used for session lunches, came from the library and from Learning Design and Technology. Our learning community is geared primarily toward beginners to develop foundational knowledge around open education and skills of finding, evaluating, and creating OER, as well as exploring the intersections of open and educational equity. So here you can see some of our learning community goals for both of our iterations. In both years, participants came from a variety of roles at UVA, including faculty, librarians, instructional designers, and a graduate student. The disciplines represented by the participants included education, nursing, business, world languages, African American studies, health sciences, math, fine arts, and engineering. So they came from across all of the University of Virginia. And before we move forward, we'd invite you to share either in chat or by unmuting what communities are most involved in open work at your institution. I'll pause here for a little bit to allow you some time to share, and Bethany will also post the question in the chat. Librarians and instructional designers. Nice. Student government representative. Center for Learning. Wonderful. So we see a lot of commonalities here. The library being a central resource, as well as Center for Teaching and Learning, instructional designers, student representative. This is great. Thank you all for sharing. So moving on to the structure and content of our learning community. All of our sessions were held in person on Friday afternoons with lunch provided and ran for 75 minutes. Participants completed readings and pre-session work in our Learning Community Pressbooks guide so that the time during our sessions could be dedicated to hands-on activities, discussion, and sharing. In creating our Learning Community Guide, we relied heavily on Abby Elder's OER Starter Kit as we remixed and created materials for our OER. And Bethany is putting the link to our Learning Community Guide in chat. So the session topics that we included in our learning communities ranged from basic foundational knowledge to developing skills around searching, evaluating, and creating OER and open pedagogy assignments, as well as making learning accessible and inclusive for all learners. As for our session lesson plans, we took inspiration from the OEN Open Pedagogy Learning Circle curriculum. And each of our sessions followed basically the same structure. We started with a warm-up or icebreaker, at times bridging the content from our previous session. Next, we had a brief presentation on the topic of the day, followed by plenty of time for hands-on exploration and application by participants. And then we concluded with reflection on what participants learned and next steps. Inspired also by universal design for learning, we designed multiple means of representation in our content, as well as multiple means of action and expression for participants to engage in activities and learning. Just to give you an idea of a sample session structure, the focus of this session is how else might OER improve student success beyond affordability? Our presentation included a discussion of Lambert's social justice framework for open education, the potential impact of OER on student sense of belonging, an application of universal design for learning and accessibility in the creation of OER. Next, participants engaged in a hands-on activity in small groups. We prepared a list of 10 OER that participants could explore in groups and asked them to use a rubric to evaluate how the OER met criteria of representational diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. This activity allowed them to see how considerations of diversity and inclusion might be interwoven in the creation of an OER. Some of the changes that we made in our second iteration for this spring 2025 were that we reduced the number of sessions from 6 to 5 for the program, and we met once a week for 5 weeks. This time around, we added a session on the intersections of Gen AI and OER, and we invited guest speaker Peter Musser, who is the head of library services of ICSME. We also removed the session that we originally had in our first iteration on licensing and copyright, simply because the copyright lawyer in the UVA library had left the university, and at the time of organizing the program, we didn't really have anyone in place that could join us. So instead, we're hoping to offer a standalone session later in the semester on licensing and copyright. Another change we made was to increase participant interaction during the sessions by offering more time to engage in hands-on activities and exploration. For the second iteration, we also updated the learning community guide based on feedback from participants, and we updated the content, making sure that readings were recent, and also we checked to make sure that links were still live. And then in this iteration, we integrated a new activity, a roadmap activity, that allowed participants to jot down insights that they had on open education as they went through the sessions, to engage in reflection on the content and topics that we covered, and to start working on what we hoped would be a program takeaway, something that they could start to work on after the program had ended and that they could apply in their own context, their own teaching context. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, can everyone see the roadmap here? Okay. This is just one page of the roadmap where you can see that the first two sections allow the participants to jot down some insights and to engage in reflection as they're going through our learning community Pressbooks guide at home. So those two sections are to be completed at home so that when they come to our session, they are already starting to think about the content and the connections between the content and their own work. And then the last section, the takeaway, is done during the session, at the end of our session, and allows participants to start thinking about how they might work on something specifically related to open that they could integrate into their own teaching or instructional context. So now I'm going to turn things over to Bethany.
Thanks, Emily. So you've heard what we did, and what everybody usually wants to know is, okay, that's great, but how did it all actually go in the end? So since this is the second iteration of the community, there's some consistent threads that we've really seen between the two communities that we have. One of the things we were very deliberate about, as Emily mentioned, is expanding the community beyond faculty. So in both runs through, we had a cohort of individuals who may not normally find themselves in meetings and learning groups together. And this resulted in really rich discussion and sharing of perspectives from various vantage points. For instance, instructional designers bring forth, a very markedly different approach to scaffolding and building instruction. And again, a well-deserved shout out to all the librarians out there who serve as excellent champions for doing deep dives into research and resource discovery. So people's ideas and thoughts were really challenged and really, with having those different conversations and perspectives in the room. We also felt that there was a keen interest both times in the connection between OER and open pedagogy, and this idea of creating equitable and representative learning spaces for all learners. Most of the participants, if not all of them, mentioned at some point the desire to increase and change the student learning experience. And this was a definite driving factor. It was a desire to transform students' learning for a more affordable and equitable experience as well. The scaffolding of theory and practice worked really well. Relying on the participants to do a little bit of that pre-reading was critical. As Emily mentioned, the first time around, we did a little bit more of that teacher talk, a little bit more of that lecture. And we found that the time together could be much better used for deeper engagement and conversation around the topic. The in-person sessions worked well both times in a period where, so much of our work sometimes is a quick Zoom meeting, here and there. Having a community where participants discovered that they're not alone. They got together, had some lunch, shared that time together. They were interested and engaged in the conversations in a different way than doing it in more of maybe a virtual format. And as many of us know who work with open sometimes feel, it can be a somewhat lonely road. And Emily and I heard conversations around how grateful people were that they could get together and talk with one another. And we both, we've all had those moments of feeling like we're pushing that boulder up the hill and just having people in a supportive space. And we really, view our work in this as really more facilitators. We facilitated this. Really, the key takeaways came from the participants. It was them who put in the work and put in the perspective that really made the community outstanding. And finally, we determined that through many of these same connections, participants left with a knowledge of outlets where they might share their work, and they had actionable steps for what to do after the community wraps, sort of that what comes next. So speaking in terms of next steps, we'd like to share two resources that were actually created. They came out of our first cohort of from two faculty members. Shu-Chen Chen is from the East Asian Language Department, and she's in the process of finalizing an open text that is centered on Chinese brushstroke methods, and she's including student work in it. So there's that open pedagogy approach. And Daniel James in the mathematics department, he's embraced the interactive open authoring potential of H5P to create a bank of calculus exercises that have also been shared with local high schools. The interactive activities, they're openly licensed for reuse and remixing. And he really began this work as part of this community as a way to meet the needs of not only his students, but other needs that he sees sort of in the larger community in his conversations. As we're always, we like hearing directly from the participants themselves instead of just assuming everything, went well. Here are a few reflective comments, and we won't, I'll pause briefly, but we won't linger too long here. In this particular statement, this participant noted their understanding of OER was deepened and that they appreciated the community aspect since it involved conversations with their peers. We had another reflection, and this speaks to student gains from OER through engaging with learning in a more authentic manner. They surfaced knowledge of needing to construct open materials with accessibility at the forefront. And I think as we're all aware, particularly as we look at the final rule on Title II, that's critical to design with intention from the beginning. And this, finally, this reflection from this participant said, they received encouragement that they can actually do this. And they spoke about the importance of community and the opportunity to meet with people outside of kind of that silo of their own unit there. So during the final session of the learning community, we asked participants to complete an anonymous survey and provide us with feedback, always important. And some of those suggestions included these workshops that lean into sticky issues around licensing. So having some more offerings beyond the community, especially with the advent of increased AI usage, questions around copyright. A session on Pressbooks, which we have an institutional license for. How do you get started? How do you do that? And we do offer some of these sessions, but maybe more advertising is clearly needed on our part. Also, even though we've embedded a lot of hands-on work time, hands-on work was included, in this round a little more intentionally, but participants really valued that. They really enjoyed having that time, whether in a group or with others, to really dive into the material and learn more. And in terms of the next steps, there was definitely a keen interest of keeping the conversation moving beyond these sessions. How do we keep the momentum building? How do we get this going? Faculty talked about, forming a small working group within their department, or having just general meetups to have people who have an interest get together more frequently. And before we move forward, though, we'd like to invite you to share either in chat or through audio um, what your experiences have been like if you've participated in a learning community in the past. You can share aspects that have worked really well, what you've liked, and things that you would like to share with those of us who are creating communities, things to keep in mind. So I'll briefly pause here, allow you to contribute that to chat. And we'll read those as kind of we move forward, again, wanting to make sure we save a little bit of time at the end to have some questions and answers as well.
If you prefer to speak, please raise your hand and I'll allow you to use your microphone.
And as you're kind of thinking on that, it's kind of a big question of reaching back into things that you've done. Emily is going to kind of move forward with talking a little bit about sort of where we go from here, next steps, and all of that.
Thanks, Bethany. So taking into consideration the outcomes of our learning community and participant feedback, we'd like to offer some final reflections and best practices. So one of the things that was most valuable in our learning community in both iterations was to open up the learning community to a broader range of voices and perspectives. Having people with different roles, different perspectives, different expertise, and coming from different disciplines really brought a rich conversation on OER and open pedagogy to our sessions. One thing that we found valuable was to try to seek commitment from the participants to participate and attend all sessions. This is particularly important to be able to create a sense of community and to allow participants to build connections and bridges with each other. One thing that participants enjoyed, I think, in both iterations were our discussions on moving the conversation beyond affordability and into conversations on the potential for OER and open pedagogy to empower learners and to advance educational equity. Like we mentioned before, having pre-session readings and pre-session work to do outside of our meetings allowed us to dedicate the time during our session to application of new concepts and exploration. And this was very helpful, I think, for participants to kind of dig in, dig deeper, and really try out some of the things that we were discussing. We also tried as best as we could to model the practices and principles that we were discussing during our sessions. So for example, Bethany and I created the Learning Community Pressbooks Guide for the participants to be able to engage in readings and exploration of topics. We also, as best as we could, integrated the principles of universal design for learning and accessibility in developing both our content and our session structure. And then, like we've discussed already, having opportunities during the sessions for participants to dig deeper and practice the concepts that we're discussing, and also to help support them in thinking about what they might be working on towards a takeaway that they could apply beyond the sessions and into their own work. So based on the feedback that we've gotten from participants in both iterations and also based on our own experiences as facilitators, these are some of the things that we'll be thinking about as we develop the third iteration of the learning community for next academic year. Building in more work time for participants to practice new skills, even though we did focus on that this time around. I think having even more time during the sessions for participants to practice, particularly in searching for OER and evaluating OER and considering issues of educational equity. One thing that we struggled with in this iteration, but not in our first iteration, was attendance. And we're still trying to figure out why that was and how we might address it in our next iteration. Even though we asked participants to commit to attendance at least 4 out of the 5 sessions, we ended up having very spotty attendance this time around. And so this is something we'll be thinking about how to address for next time. In the 2 iterations in our first year, we had 11 participants, and in the second year, we had 15. And we found that perhaps 15 was a little much and kind of prevented some of the participants from engaging fully and making connections. And so next time, if we offer this next academic year, I think we'll try to limit the participant community to 12 or fewer participants. And then, like we discussed already, making sure we add a session back in that's related to accessibility and copyright. And next time around, we would like to focus more on using the roadmap during our sessions and referring back to it and referring back to the insights and reflections that the participants have gleaned throughout the program. So we'd like to thank you for joining us today and for your comments in chat. And at this point, we'd like to open it up for questions or comments, and feel free to use the chat feature, or if you feel more comfortable unmuting, you can certainly do that, I think. Thank you.
We did have a question come in through chat. Was there any incentive for participation, such as a small stipend?
No, we didn't have funds to be able to offer that. We hoped that the incentive of free lunch might be sufficient to get participants to show up. And I think somehow that attendance was completely fine in our first iteration, and we didn't have problems with that. And in our second iteration, we did. So, Bethany, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a great question. I think, yeah, free food is a great lure. We would love, honestly, to be able to incentivize in some way to have whether it's a stipend or whether it's something, that we could offer to the participants to be able to attend and really shift some of their work towards open. I think it's something we'll continue to kind of push for, to seek funding for. Like so many, places, it's kind of trying to find a little bit of money where we can, to do the most good that we can out of this. I will say that the university, not related to this, necessarily to the community, but there are a number of grants, internal grants that programs that we run that we've seen a lot of traction over the past several years in faculty applying for these for projects with Emily's division through the Learning, Design, and Technology through the library. We had a seed fund for some grants. I think a few of you had mentioned that as something that you're looking at as well. That goes, I always say it goes a step towards, incentivizing people to do this work, which we all know is again incredibly time consuming and is often just a very small amount that kind of gets them to, gets them along the way, gets them started with that. But yeah. Yeah. Good question about other than attendance, other unanticipated roadblocks. I think, it's been a challenging semester. I think we all can, kind of attest to it's been a challenging year so far. I think there's been a lot of weight, faculty and librarians and the others involved have been shouldering in their work related to many of those issues that have arisen. I think that has been definitely key to that. We also do wonder if, part of, again, going back to the attendance might have been the first time we did it in the fall and this time we did it in the spring. But I think the other roadblocks might really truly just be the time to do this and really knowing what to do next after the community. But Emily, you might have some additional insight there.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. In addition to what you shared, Bethany, I think I would say that, as we're all aware, faculty find it very difficult to carve out time to do this work. And many times they're not compensated either, with funds or in the promotion and tenure process or recognized in other ways. And so I think the faculty who joined us were genuinely excited and enthusiastic about open and the connections between open and educational equity. And for some of them, I think one of the roadblocks would simply be time.
I see Robert had asked about any credential badge programs. We do not. To sort of have Emily, you may be more in tune with this, but not to my knowledge. But it is definitely something that we've would be a wonderful thing. And about how has the UVA's administration been supportive of been of these OER efforts? I think that there has been a lot of very good verbal support there. I think, as with so many, again, things that need to be funded, the support is there, but I think when we start talking about, okay, we really need to have the funds too. So there's, I think, a lot of verbal and time release support to do this, but funding has been very challenging to get a effort going. And full transparency, I tell everybody this, in my case, OER is a part of what I do. I share that duty and that role in the library on top of my instructional design work that I do with another member. And I know for Emily, that is very similar. So we don't have per se a dedicated OER, the person. It's really been very much a effort on many of our parts to really elevate this work. Yeah. Favorite courses using OER. Good question. I'm not sure about that. That is a really good question about UVA considering small course fee for courses using OERs. I was wondering a little bit more about what you were kind of thinking. You mean reduced fee for OERs, or is something a little bit different than that? I do know that we, like many, we have course marking in our registration system. I'll say that students can select courses based on low or no cost. So that is something that they are able to do. But in terms of I think like a course fee difference, not to my knowledge. Well, as Emily had shared there, oh, thank you very much for the small course fee. Thank you. I definitely open that up here. And just knowing that we're at time at this point, we both wanted to thank you for coming today, for attending, for hearing this. We'll share out the slides that have all the links and the information, but just really wanted to thank you all. And we obviously welcome questions, or if you want to reach out or connect, to further the conversation. But thank you so much for inviting us and welcoming us so warmly.
Yes, thank you.
Emily, Emily and Bethany, thank you on behalf of the conference coordinators and all of us in attendance. It was fantastic. So thank you for the time. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.